The Christian Petracca saga. It has allegedly somewhat been resolved, but I am not convinced. Now, at the time of recording, Christian Petracca has recommitted somewhat his future to the Melbourne Demons. And there's been a lot of comments online accusing him, the club, the coach, captain, everyone and everything in between and amongst this saga for wrongdoing. And I thought I would chime in to give Petracca a few options. But first of all, let's start with the problem. Now, the problem spans back quite a while ago. Simon Goodwin has had a lot of accusations of some misdoings, and to be completely honest with you, I think it's quite out there in the media, and although I can't really specifically say what's been happening, there's a couple questionable things there and some culture problems that has arisen from the coach. And obviously from some of the players, Joel Smith, Clayton Oliver, there's been some interesting things happening, Stephen May as well. So perhaps this has been brewing in Petracca's mind for a while, given that the club's clearly got some instability there. Off-field, that is, not on-field, but even on-field. I mean, Melbourne finishing in 14th in 2024. Compare that to 2023, where they finished in 4th place at the end of the home and away ladder. That's the biggest drop from an AFL team in recent history. 4th to 14th. Name a bigger downfall. Now, obviously there's been more, and we can talk about some even Melbourne in 2018 to 19, the downfall there was crazy. But the problem then progresses to when the injury happened. We all know against Collingwood, Petracca got a lacerated spleen, just a lot of internal damage to some heavy contact. He went off and the doctors deemed him okay to go back on. Now, it was early in the game, so the Deeds could have come back, but they already looked unlikely. And this is where things get really interesting. The problem is the AFL. Now, recently, Jared Waitley came out in a radio talk show to talk about how Christian Petracca has been seeking a trade because he's unhappy with the club and more so distressed with the AFL. In an interview with Kate Roffey, we could see that there was a clear lack of empathy from the Demons and the AFL in the case of the injury from Petracca. Now, at the time, I'm not sure if you remembered, but the AFL and the Demons really didn't cover it that much. They tried to sweep it under the rug and didn't label it as a very severe injury, where in reality, he could have died. His partner got calls from doctors there saying, this might be it, come in, you might be saying your goodbyes. This was a life-threatening injury, which subsequently has resulted in life-altering trauma to Christian Petracca, and that is why he's acted the way he has. He's had no backing from the club, no backing from the AFL. Now, there's a bigger issue here that if Petracca was to move forward with some sort of suing, or I don't even know, the AFL could be in a lot of potential trouble because they have gone against a lot of their codes of conduct or codes in general, and to be honest, it's pretty clear that the AFL fucked up. To put it colloquially, they fucked up. The AFL did, and they're trying to sweep it under the rug because there could be some enormous financial repercussions if they are to be found guilty of wrongdoing by allowing Petracca both to play in the game and then what they'd done afterwards. And obviously this stems from the Demons saying you're alright, the doctors saying you're okay. Like, you cannot have a life-threatening injury and have the doctors say, you know what, you're fine, get back on the fucking field. I mean, I believe in a podcast which I listened to recently, The Howie Games by Howie, the commentator. It's a really good podcast, but in this podcast, Petracca talked about how there were 3 or 4 occasions where he had to go back to hospital with life-threatening injuries. He talked about the trauma behind the injury, and you could sort of get a sense listening to the podcast that he couldn't elaborate much on what has happened. We obviously all know why he was traumatized by it, but it felt like there was something stopping him from elaborating more on the trauma and wanting to speak more about it. Now, just a bit more on this whole AFL and what Jared Waitley brought to light on radio about some more underlying information about this. It was pretty clear that after the King's birthday match, Melbourne and the AFL had a principal objective of clear the medical process, which looked awful to all those watching, and protect from future litigation. Now, I think the point is, in the first following days and weeks when the injury had happened, Petracca must have felt like the AFL and Melbourne were dealing with this in sort of a financial law type of way, ignoring the fact that his life was in danger. And obviously if that happens to any player at any club, there's going to be a fracture of trust, and there's going to be a lot of underlying problems following that. And that is, well, at least in my opinion, and a lot of these articles are saying, that's why he wants to leave. And I think the Melbourne Demons should let Christian Petracca leave. The AFL and the Demons actively tried to create a picture that everything was okay, Petracca was fine, it's just another one of those injuries, it's unfortunate. There were publicly documented statements from both the club and the league that Petracca was in good spirits and recovering well, when in fact, He was in critical condition in ICU, and family members, like I've mentioned before, his partner was called in thinking that he might die. So it's quite clear and obvious now, Melbourne and the AFL swept it under the rug, ignored Christian Petracca, just to try and avoid big financial and just general repercussions because they had fucked up. They'd fucked up bad. And in fucking up, they had to save themselves, and in saving themselves, they fucked up Petracca and his life even worse. Now, it's going to be really interesting what happens from this, because I feel like Petracca's got the upper hand now. I feel like he's got some sort of, not revenge, but he's been fucked over, and his life has been changed for the worse in this case, and it could take forever and a lifetime for him to overcome the mental scars that has arisen from such a traumatic event. And so there's a lot of avenues where this could continue down. It could stop, you know, it could be called off, and like Petracca saying, "No, I'm committed to the Demons, let's send it there," or it could keep going, and if it does, it's going to get spicy. Now, I'm a bit biased here because I do really like Christian Petracca. I listen to a lot of him on the media, and he seems like a really nice guy from all accounts. And that's why I'm on the side of we need to do something about this. So just a little bit more on the article. On more than one occasion, Petracca has expressed his disappointment to the club, yet the president conceded that she hadn't spoken with the family and hasn't had contact with Petracca. So the president clearly hasn't reached out at all. Lack of empathy, lack of care, lack of just human nature. If someone you're somewhat responsible for is nearly dying / dead, what the fuck? And this just highlights some more cultural problems of Melbourne, and that's the next step. What does Christian Petracca do? The options. The options for Christian Petracca are pretty simple. Leave the Melbourne Football Club. That is number one priority. Even though he might come out in the next few weeks and even more double down, recommitting his future to the Melbourne Football Club, they have fucked him over. It's your time to leave. Now, from a performance viewpoint on the field, dropping from 4th place in 2023 to 14th in 2024 is indicative and a sign of things to come. Melbourne, they do have decent young talent, but Neil Bullen's left, Cozzy Pickett's gone, and then Clayton Oliver will probably go as well. Their best player, Max Gawn, is getting old. There's no direction, there's a lack of insight, and even though they do have some good young players, they're probably gonna wanna leave given the cultural problems. So for Petracca, get out the club. Do anything you can to get out. Following this segment is where do you go? The choice. Now, Petracca has come out and said that he would only think about or want to play for big Victorian clubs in front of a big crowd that's doing well. So, what are the teams that are big Victorian clubs? Hawthorn, Geelong, Collingwood, Carlton, Richmond, Essendon. That's what I think are big clubs. Obviously, Melbourne you can put in there as well. Unfortunately, St Kilda, North Melbourne, those sorts of teams. Dogs, I'm not really considering. In front of a big crowd, they fit all these things as well, these clubs. However, being a good team, you can cancel out Richmond pretty easily. So, these are the clubs Petracca would want to join theoretically, according to evidence of what he's said. Now for the next segment, which clubs can afford him? The only club that could really afford Christian Petracca right now in terms of draft picks are the Richmond Tigers, but they're already out of this conversation. The Essendon Football Club in the current draft in 2025 have pick 8. The next best is Collingwood, potentially at pick number 10, Carlton at pick 11, Hawthorn at pick 12, Geelong pick 16, and etc. After pick 20, it doesn't really matter. So I guess the point is, unless they trade for future first rounders, not many clubs that he will be able to go to can afford him. The next process of this is the salary cap space. Who can actually afford him in the salary cap? Hawthorn definitely can, but I would very much question if Carlton, Collingwood can. Essendon probably could. Geelong probably could fit him in, but once again, I'm not entirely sure. And then comes the final piece of the puzzle. What is therefore the option? Well, luckily for Carlton, it's not just draft picks you can lure Petracca to the club and convince Melbourne to give him up. There's also player trades. Now, typically in the AFL, player trades don't work out all too well. Now, the Demons have struggled for a key forward for a multitude of years. Ben Brown bought to from North Melbourne, multiple Coleman medalist, all Australian I think as well, flopped at the D's. Josh Shackey, high draft pick, flopped at the D's. Sam Wiedemann, potential, flopped at the D's. Tom McDonald was up forward, who did well for a few years, but is a defender. They do have Jacob Van Rooyen, but that's their only good one right now. If you ignore Bailey Fritsch, he's not really tall. Conversely, Carlton have an abundance of key forwards, most namely Charlie Curnow, multiple Coleman medalist, Harry Mackay, Coleman medalist as well. And you could technically argue Jack Silvani, De Koning, and Harry Lemmy are key forwards too. But the point is, can they trade up Harry Mackay as part of a monumental trade for Christian Petracca? Now, it's already been shut down by Carlton, saying they're not letting go of Harry Mackay, and it makes sense. You know, Carlton have plenty of midfielders. There's no point giving up a great key forward system just to get another midfielder in. But to be honest, Carlton don't have a dynamic forward mid player. Cripps is amazing, Brownlow medalist, Walsh is great, but no like Dustin Martin, a guy who can go forward for half a game and go in the center and dominate both and everywhere on the pitch. So that potentially leaves Petracca with one option, the Blues. The Blues, I think, is really his only realistic option. And it won't even happen because the Blues have said they won't give up Harry Mackay. And even if they said, you know what, we're willing to give Harry Mackay, finding a balance where Melbourne and Carlton could meet for a trade would be impossible, because what's Petracca worth? Like 4 first rounders? But if you add in Harry Mackay in, is it now Harry Mackay and a first rounder and a second rounder for Christian Petracca? Can Geelong or Hawthorn find a way to slot him in there? Can Collingwood find a way to do something? If I am a big Victorian club right now, excluding Richmond, because we're not going to be good enough for him to come there, I am doing everything to try to get this guy at our club. Just to summarize the video, something big may still come from this. This might be one of the biggest ordeals in the AFL recent history if there are more findings to come out of this and more litigations to follow, more lawsuits, more jeopardy, more repercussions. Or it could be swept under the rug. Petracca could commit to the Demons, the coaches, the president and the AFL can apologise and give some sort of compensation to Petracca, and it could all be settled. But we'll wait to see. And at the time of recording, the truth of it has yet to be answered. What really did happen in the situation? Who really is at fault? Will there be apologies in public given? What will Petracca do? What will the Demons do? What will the AFL do? And what is the true reality of this story? I guess we'll wait and see.